in the quiet depths of prehistory, long before the pyramids, long before Athens or Rome, and thousands of years before the Bible was written, a remarkable world emerged on a flat, sun-scorched plain between two great rivers. It was a land of reeds and mud, of slow waterways, shifting marshes, and wide horizons. At first glance, it looked like the last place a civilization would rise. Yet here, more than 6,500 years ago, humanity took one of its boldest steps forward. This was the world of ancient Sumer, the earliest urban civilization we know. But before we go any further, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It's a simple and meaningful way to support the channel, and it truly means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight, so feel free to share that in the comments below. To understand Sumer, we must return to a time when most people lived in small villages, tending simple fields. But southern Mesopotamia was different. Its soil was incredibly fertile, renewed each year by the Tigris and Euphrates. But the land was also unpredictable. Floods could destroy entire settlements, drought could turn fields to dust. There was no stone, little wood, and few natural resources. Survival required cooperation on a scale humanity had never attempted. Slowly, the people of this region began to reshape their environment. They dug canals, managed floods, and created vast networks of irrigation. They learned to control water, the one force that ruled their lives. This shared challenge drew communities together and allowed population centers to grow far larger than the world had ever seen. By around 4,500 BC, southern Mesopotamia was changing rapidly. Villages expanded, trade networks developed, and a new form of organized settlement began to emerge. The city. Among the earliest were Eridu, Lagash, and the most influential of all, Uruk. Uruk, around 3,500 to 3000 BC, was unlike anything that had ever existed. Its walls enclosed tens of thousands of people. Its temple complexes were monumental projects requiring thousands of workers, and inside these temples, something revolutionary was taking shape. To manage offerings, labor, and trade, temple administrators pressed symbols into wet clay. These simple marks evolved over centuries into cuneiform, the world's first complete writing system. With writing, the Sumerians could record myths, laws, inventories, and stories. Through their clay tablets, their world would echo across time. But writing was only one part of the Sumerian achievement. They pioneered the wheel, advanced the plough, developed early mathematics, mapped the stars, and created the first known legal and administrative systems. They invented cylinder seals for identification, designed elaborate irrigation, and constructed temples that stood like mountains over the flat plains, yet daily life for most Sumerians was simple. Their homes were built from sun-dried mudbrick. Families stored grain in clay jars, fetched water from canals, and worked the fields from sunrise to dusk. Children learned by watching their parents, and the sons of elite families sometimes attended tablet schools, where they practiced writing for hours each day. Towering over every city was its ziggurat, a massive stepped platform that brought people closer to the gods. Each city had a patron deity, Enki at Eridu, Nana at and Inanna at Uruk. These gods were believed to control rain, fertility, success, and fate. Religion shaped every aspect of life, from agriculture to politics. The temple was not only a spiritual center, but an economic one, a place where trade, labor, and authority converged. Though they shared a common culture, Sumerians did not form one unified kingdom. Instead, they lived in independent city-states, each with its own rulers and rivalries. They built alliances, negotiated treaties, and sometimes went to war. Their diplomacy, conflicts, and shifting power struggles created one of the earliest recorded political landscapes in human history. Despite their challenges, the Sumerians built something astonishing. Cities bustling with artisans, farmers, priests, and administrators. Canals stretching for miles. Temples that dominated the skyline. And a written legacy that would outlive them by thousands of years. Their innovations would influence the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and countless civilizations that followed. The world of Sumer, born from mud, water, and human ingenuity, marked the beginning of something profound. But this was only the beginning. The next chapter would bring the rise of kings, the first recorded wars, and a golden age that reshaped the ancient Near East. As the early cities of Sumer expanded, their fields spread across the plains like green ribbons fed by the lifeblood of their canals. These were not merely settlements, but living machines of labour, trade and worship. Yet as populations grew and resources tightened, a new kind of leadership began to take shape, one that would transform Sumer from a land of shared survival into a world of power, rivalry and ambition. In the earliest days, Sumerian cities were governed by councils of elders and by priests who interpreted the will of the gods. But managing a growing city was far more complicated than guiding a village. It required someone who could organize labor for the canals, oversee the temple economy, and, when necessary, command the defense of the city. And so, somewhere around 3000 BC, the figure of the Lugal emerged. Literally, the big man, the earliest form of a king. These first kings were not absolute monarchs. Their authority rested on both religious legitimacy and their ability to protect the city. But as centuries passed, the role grew more powerful, and the early councils faded into symbolic bodies. The Sumerian city-state had become a political reality, each one governed by a Lugal who claimed not only human authority, but divine approval. Among the earliest of these cities to rise to prominence was Uruk, the home of the legendary King Gilgamesh. Though his story survives through epic poetry rather than strict historical record, the world he ruled over was very real. Uruk was a city of monumental scale with towering temple precincts dedicated to Inanna and Anu, its ziggurats rising above the flat horizon like artificial mountains. It was a place where craftsmanship flourished. Potters, metalworkers, builders, and scribes all worked under the protection of the city's walls. But Uruk was not alone. Across the plains, the cities of Lagash, Umma, Kish, and Eridu grew in power. Each claimed ancient rights, sacred traditions, and divine favour. And as the Sumerian landscape filled with these proud independent powers, the stage was set for the world's first recorded conflicts. At the heart of many rivalries was water control. Of irrigation canals meant control of life itself, and disputes over boundaries and resource rights soon escalated into organised warfare. These were not battles of massive armies, but deliberate, ritualised clashes. Soldiers armed with copper-tipped spears, slings, and wooden shields, marching under the banners of their gods. One of the earliest recorded wars took place between Lagash and Umma, two neighbouring cities locked in a generations-long conflict over fertile farmland. Their boundary dispute was so significant that early kings carved inscriptions into stone to record their victories and justify their claims. The most famous of these is the Stele of the Vultures, a carved monument from around 2450 BC. On its weathered surface, we see one of history's first military scenes, the soldiers of Lagash marching in tight formation, their spears upright, their king standing tall among them. Another panel shows the aftermath, vultures circling above the fallen enemy. This stone, though broken and incomplete, marks a critical moment. It is the earliest known war monument, the first attempt by humans to immortalize a battlefield, triumph in writing and imagery. In these early wars, kings proved their legitimacy, not only through ritual, but through victory. A successful leader was one who expanded fields, secured trade, and captured rival cities. A failed one often vanished from the record entirely. Yet warfare was only one part of the story. As the Sumerian cities grew more complex, so too did their governments. The temple remained the spiritual and economic center of each city, but the palace became a rival institution. A worldly seat of power to match the divine kings, oversaw construction projects, trade expeditions, and public works. They claimed to be shepherds of their people, chosen by the gods to guide and protect the city. And everyday life continued around them. Farmers tending barley fields that stretched to the horizon, scribes pressing cuneiform signs into clay by lamplight, merchants leading caravans of donkeys along the dusty roads linking one city to another. The air in the markets buzzed with voices, deals, and the scent of grain and wool. It was a world alive with human ambition, human labour, and human conflict. But beneath this growing complexity, a deeper transformation was underway, a shift that would reshape Sumer's political landscape forever. As cities competed for supremacy, one question began to overshadow all others. Which city, which king, would become the first to unite the Sumerian world? The answer would emerge in the centuries ahead, as ambitious rulers sought to surpass their rivals and create something larger than any single city-state. The rise of true kingship that ruled not just a city but a region, was coming. And with it, the first empire-building ambitions in human history. Sumer had entered a new stage of its story. The cities were growing stronger, the kings were becoming more powerful, and the world's earliest political rivalries were pushing Sumer toward a future that would change the entire ancient Near East. As Sumer's independent city-states grew in wealth and population, their ambitions expanded with them. The plains of southern Mesopotamia were now a tapestry of fortified settlements, each with its own traditions, patron gods, and ruling dynasties. Their temples rose like man-made mountains over the horizon. Their canals stretched across the land like veins of an immense organism, and their markets hummed with the noise of merchants, traders, farmers, and artisans. But beneath this thriving world lay a growing tension. The question of dominance, which city would rule the land, became the central political challenge of the age. By around 2600 BC, several cities had amassed enough power to stake their claim to supremacy. Kish, in the northern part of Sumer, often declared itself the rightful leader, boasting the ancient title King of Kish, which symbolized authority over all the Sumerian plain. But Kish had rivals. Uruk, with its legendary king Gilgamesh, claimed its own ancient lineage and immense spiritual prestige. With its flourishing port and temple to the moon god, Nana, rose swiftly as a commercial powerhouse. Lagash, militaristic and fiercely proud, controlled valuable stretches of fertile land. Each city believed it had divine approval. Each believed its king was destined for greatness. What followed was an age of shifting alliances, regional wars, and political innovation. Power no longer rested solely on the religious authority of the temples. It was now measured in soldiers, canals, trade routes, and diplomatic influence. Kings sought legitimacy not just from the gods, but through conquest and administration. One of the earliest figures to leave a deep mark on this landscape was Eannatum, king of Lagash, around 2450 BC. He was the ruler, depicted on the stele of the vultures, the king who led his army in tight phalanx formation, spears raised, shields locked. His reign offers one of the first examples of a king attempting to rule beyond his own city. Eannatum campaigned relentlessly, subduing the neighbouring city of Umma and extending his influence over much of southern Sumer. His ambitions were clear, a unified Sumer under Lagashian leadership, but his successes were temporary. As soon as his power weakened, rival cities reclaimed their independence. These constant shifts in authority revealed a core reality of Sumerian politics. Unity was possible, but only fragile and fleeting. Meanwhile, life in the cities continued with remarkable sophistication. The temple complexes were not only religious centers, but economic hubs. Within their walls were vast storerooms filled with grain, wool, oil, and hundreds of clay tablets documenting every transaction. Teams of scribes recorded wages, rations, land transfers, and offerings to the gods. Their administrative skill was one of the great engines of Sumerian civilization. In the shadow of the temples, workshops produced goods that would travel across Mesopotamia and beyond. Potters shaped vessels on fast-spinning wheels, metalworkers melted copper over charcoal fires, pouring the liquid metal into molds to create tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects. Textile workers wove fine cloth, often dyed with precious pigments imported from faraway lands. Every product was a symbol of Sumerian ingenuity. Outside the cities, the landscape was shaped by agriculture. Each year, farmers worked the fields with ploughs drawn by oxen. They dug irrigation ditches with bronze-tipped tools, guiding precious river water into their orchards and fields. Barley, wheat, dates, onions, and flax filled the fertile plains. Their harvests fed the cities, supported the temples, and fueled the ambitions of kings. But the competition among city-states continued. Around 2350 BC, a powerful figure emerged, Lugal-Zaggisi, king of Umma. With strategic alliances and ruthless determination, he conquered city after city, ultimately claiming control over nearly all of Sumer. When he marched into the holy city of Nippur, home to the god Enlil, considered the ultimate authority among Sumerian deities, he declared himself king of the land. For a moment, it seemed that unity had finally been achieved. But fate was already moving against him. Far to the north, in the city of Akkad, a man of extraordinary ambition was rising. A man who would change not only Sumer but the entire ancient world. His name was Sargon, and he would bring an end to the age of Sumerian city-states, replacing them with a new political reality, empire. Sargon was not a Sumerian by birth. He came from the north, from a Semitic-speaking people, often serving as traders and administrators in the Sumerian world. Legend claims that he was discovered as an infant floating in a basket on the Euphrates River, a story echoing across later cultures. Whether myth or truth, his rise was undeniable. He overthrew his local king, seized control of Akkad, and built a disciplined standing army unlike anything Sumer had ever seen. When Sargon marched south, Lugal-Zaggisi tried to stop him, but the armies of Sumer, divided for generations, were no match for the unified force of Akkad. Sargon defeated Lugal-Zaggisi in battle, captured him, and, according to tradition, brought him bound and humiliated to the temple of Enlil. With that, the balance of power shifted forever. Sumer, the birthplace of cities, kingship, and writing, now stood on the threshold of a new era. Its cities would remain vibrant, its culture influential, but its independence was fading. A new political force, the world's first empire, was rising on its doorstep. The story of Sumer was entering its next great chapter, one of conquest, cultural exchange, and transformation. The rise of Sargon marked a turning point, not just for Sumer, but for the entire ancient Near East. For more than a millennium, Sumerian cities had lived in a delicate balance of rivalry and cooperation, independent, proud, and deeply rooted in their own traditions. But when Sargon seized power in the northern city of Akkad, around 2334 BC, he introduced a force that Sumer had never truly faced. A unified, disciplined military, backed by a ruler whose ambition extended far beyond the boundaries of a single city-state. Sumer was about to be absorbed into something entirely new, the world's first empire. Sargon understood the value of centralization. His army was not a temporary militia raised for a single campaign, but a standing professional force, loyal to him personally, paid through taxes and tribute. With this army, he launched a sweeping series of campaigns. City after city fell before him. Kish, Uruk, Lagash, each was conquered in rapid succession. The fragmented mosaic of Sumerian politics shattered under the weight of his military strategy. By the time his armies reached the holy city of Nippur, the spiritual center of Sumer, his control was complete. Sargon declared himself not merely king of his own people, but king of the four quarters of the world. It was a title without precedent, a proclamation that he ruled not one city, not one people, but the entire known universe, and astonishingly, he had the power to enforce it. Under his leadership, the Akkadian Empire stretched from the Mediterranean Sea in the west to the Zagros Mountains in the east. Sumer, for the first time in its long history, was part of a larger political world. Yet rather than erase Sumerian culture, Sargon adopted and expanded it. He kept Sumerian scribes, Sumerian religious practices, and Sumerian administrative systems. Akkadian became the language of government and diplomacy, but Sumerian remained the sacred language of temples and texts. In many ways, the Akkadian Empire represented the fusion of two civilizations, the deep cultural roots of Sumer and the expanding political ambitions of the Akkadians. But empire was not simply a matter of conquest. It required governance, communication, and infrastructure. To keep distant territories loyal, Sargon installed trusted officials as governors. He built new roads, strengthened trade routes, and established a postal system using runners and messengers. Goods moved more freely than ever before. Stone from the mountains, timber from the north, metals from distant Anatolia, and luxury goods from the Persian Gulf. Yet for all his success, Sargon's rule was not without turmoil. Rebellions broke out repeatedly, especially in the southern cities of Sumer, where ancient traditions ran deep. Many Sumerians resented the loss of their independence and the dominance of northern rulers. At one point, according to inscriptions, Sargon faced uprisings in every major city simultaneously, but his army proved unshakable, and he crushed the revolts with ruthless efficiency. By the end of his reign, he had secured his place as one of the most formidable rulers the ancient world had ever known. Sargon's sons and heirs tried to maintain the empire, but it was his grandson, Naram-Sin, who reached its peak. Naram-Sin declared himself a god, a staggering claim that broke with Sumerian tradition. On carved steles, he is shown wearing a horned crown, a symbol previously reserved for deities. He expanded the empire even further, leading campaigns into the mountains and deserts beyond Mesopotamia. His victories were celebrated in monumental art and inscriptions that glorified his divine status. Under his rule, the Akkadian Empire became a sophisticated political entity. Cities flourished, trade expanded, and the arts achieved new heights. For a time, it seemed that the empire would endure indefinitely. But history rarely moves in straight lines. Toward the end of Naram-Sin's reign, the empire began to face severe challenges. The Sumerian cities, never fully subdued in spirit, continued to resist northern control. More dangerously, distant tribes saw the empire's wealth as an irresistible target. Among these were the Gutians, mountain people from the Zagros range. Over time, a combination of internal weakness, drought, and external pressure destabilized the empire. The fall of the Akkadian Empire, around 2150 BC, was sudden and dramatic. In Sumerian lamentations, scribes described the collapse as a cosmic catastrophe. Canals abandoned, fields barren, temples looted, and cities left in darkness. Whether through famine, invasion, or administrative breakdown, the unified world Sargon built fractured into chaos. Yet from this collapse came rebirth. In the ruins of empire, the Sumerian cities re-emerged. Local rulers reclaimed authority, temples reopened. Fields were cultivated once more. It was a period of recovery, struggle, and renewal. A chance for Sumer to reclaim its ancient legacy after centuries of northern rule. Among the cities rising again, one would soon stand above all others. A city whose rulers would usher in a new golden age, a revival of Sumerian culture, law, and architecture on a scale unmatched since the earliest days of Uruk. That city was and its king would shape the next chapter of civilization. When the Akkadian Empire collapsed, Sumer found itself in a landscape of uncertainty. Canals were clogged, fields went untended, and many cities struggled to regain their earlier influence. Yet amid this fragmentation, one city rose with extraordinary determination. A place whose ancient foundations now ignited with new ambition. From this rebirth emerged what historians call the Third Period, a renaissance of Sumerian culture, administration, and architectural brilliance. It was a moment when Sumer reclaimed its identity and reached heights not seen since the legendary days of Uruk. The leader of this revival was Ur-Nammu, a king of remarkable vision. Around 2100 BC, he overthrew the last remnants of Gutian control and unified much of Sumer under his authority. Unlike earlier kings who legitimized themselves solely through military might, Ur-Nammu grounded his rule in justice, stability, and prosperity. He understood that Sumer's strength did not lie only in its armies, but in the harmony of its cities, the fertility of its fields, and the efficiency of its administration. One of his first and most enduring achievements was the creation of the world's earliest known law code. Written centuries before Hammurabi's famous laws, the Code of Ur-Nammu laid out principles of fairness, compensation, and social order. Instead of relying solely on harsh punishments, it introduced fines and legal protections designed to prevent conflict and maintain stability. It was a remarkable step towards structured governance, a recognition that the strength of a kingdom lay not only in conquest, but in justice. But Ur-Nammu's legacy goes far beyond legal reform. His grandest creation was architectural, symbolic, and spiritual. The great Ziggurat of Ur, rising from the flat Mesopotamian plain, the Ziggurat towered above the city like a man-made mountain. Constructed with millions of mud bricks and faced with baked brick layers for stability, it was dedicated to Nana, the moon god and patron deity of Ur. The structure was not a pyramid, but a stepped platform with 3 massive terraces, each accessed by monumental stairways. The uppermost level housed a temple, a holy sanctuary reserved for priests and offerings. To the people of Ur, the Ziggurat was not merely a temple, it was a bridge between earth and the divine, a place where the will of heaven met the laws of humanity. The city that surrounded this towering monument was equally impressive. Ur became a centre of trade, agriculture, and administration. Its streets bustled with merchants from distant lands, traders from Dilmun bringing copper across the sea, caravans from Elam carrying metals and stone, and Sumerian merchants exporting textiles, grain, and crafted goods. The city's wealth was reflected in its elaborate homes, administrative complexes, and bustling port, which connected Ur to the wider world through the rivers and the Persian Gulf. Under Ur-Nammu's successors, especially Shulgi, Ur entered a period of extraordinary prosperity. Shulgi reigned for nearly half a century and transformed the kingdom into a model of administrative sophistication. He standardized weights and measures, restructured taxation, and organized a highly developed bureaucracy. His scribes recorded everything: labor assignments, harvest totals, temple offerings, and trade inventories. The sheer volume of surviving tablets from this era reveals a society operating with remarkable precision. Shulgi also expanded and maintained an extensive network of roads connecting the cities of Sumer. Along these routes, he established way stations where travelers could rest, eat, and find shelter. These stations, some of the earliest recorded examples of state-run infrastructure, allowed messages, goods, and soldiers to move efficiently across the kingdom. But the achievements of were not solely administrative. This was also a cultural flowering. Scribes composed poetry, hymns, and epic tales. Scholars studied mathematics and astronomy. Musicians performed in temples, and artisans produced jewelry, cylinder seals, and finely decorated pottery. The people of were not simply rebuilding Sumer's past, they were shaping a vibrant, creative future. Yet beneath this flourishing world, the challenges of empire were beginning to stir once more. The very administrative complexity that strengthened the kingdom also created strain. Maintaining vast irrigation networks, field labour, temple economies, and military defences required enormous resources. As the rulers of demanded more from their provinces, resistance grew in the outer regions. Distant leaders began to resent the authority of a king who ruled from far off External threats also loomed. To the east, the kingdom of Elam watched Sumer's growing wealth with keen interest. To the northwest, Amorite tribes migrated into the region, seeking land and opportunity. The world beyond Sumer's borders was shifting, and for all its strength, could not remain untouched. Yet in this moment, this brief window of brilliance, Sumer shone brighter than ever. The great Ziggurat stood as a testament to human ingenuity. The code of Namu established the foundations of law. Trade and culture flourished. For a generation, it seemed that the ancient spirit of Sumer had been reborn, and that the cities of the plain would regain their former grandeur. But the forces gathering beyond the horizon would soon test everything the kings of had built. The next chapter would bring invasions, collapse, and the end of Sumer's long era of dominance. Yet from the fall of would rise new cultures that carried Sumer's knowledge into the future. The golden age of under Namu and Shulgi had reshaped Sumer into a polished and orderly world, a realm of law, trade, monumental architecture, and administrative precision. But history has a way of turning brilliance into burden. The very systems that once strengthened the state began to strain under their own weight. Vast irrigation networks required constant upkeep. Armies needed food, weapons, and wages. Temples demanded offerings. Bureaucrats demanded labour. And slowly, cracks began to appear in a kingdom that had seemed unshakable. For ordinary Sumerians, the first signs of trouble were subtle. Shortages in the stores of grain, new taxes announced by palace officials, increased labour demands from temple overseers. Over time, these pressures grew heavier. What had once been a prosperous machine of administration now felt to many like an exhausting weight. As the king demanded more from the provinces, tensions rose between the central government and the outlying cities. Beyond Sumer's borders, even greater threats were gathering. To the northwest, Amorite tribes, semi-nomadic people from the deserts of Syria, began migrating into Mesopotamia. Some came peacefully, working as farmers and herders within Sumerian lands. Others arrived as raiders. At first, their presence was manageable, but as Sumer's internal structure weakened, these once minor groups grew bolder. They seized farmland, disrupted trade routes, and challenged local governors. Sumerian armies found themselves stretched thin, defending canals and settlements across vast distances. To the east, an even more dangerous power stirred, the kingdom of Elam. Located in the highlands of southwestern Iran, Elam had long been both trading partner and rival to Sumer. Its rulers watched the growing instability of with increasing interest. A weakened Sumer meant opportunity, a chance to seize wealth, territory, and influence. And then, like a spark in dry reeds, environmental stress ignited the crisis. Around 2050 BC, the rivers began to shift. Some regions suffered devastating floods, others endured drought, irrigation canals silted up. Fields along the southern plains turned salty from over-irrigation, reducing crop yields year after year. The land that had sustained Sumer for millennia was increasingly unpredictable. Farmers struggled, food became scarce, hungry people grew restless. In the midst of this growing storm, the kings of struggled to maintain control as Shulgi's successors lacked his administrative brilliance and military discipline. They inherited a world that required strong leadership, but received only fragile authority. Each new king found himself dealing with rebellions, shortages, and foreign incursions. The breaking point came during the reign of Sin, the last king of the The city-states, exhausted by years of heavy taxation, began to slide into open revolt. Ishbi-Era, a governor in the north, declared independence, taking with him key grain-producing regions. Provinces to the west rejected Ur's authority and aligned themselves with Amorite chieftains. As internal cohesion collapsed, the kingdom's enemies pressed deeper into its borders, and then the final blow struck. In the year 2004 BC, a date preserved with chilling clarity in Sumerian records, the Elamites invaded Sumer in force. Their armies swept across the plains, capturing cities one by one. Was cut off, its supply lines severed, its allies too distant or too weak to help. As famine gripped the city, morale collapsed. The siege of was brutal. Ancient lamentations describe a city in despair. Temples desecrated, families torn apart, hunger echoing through the narrow streets. The great Ziggurat, once a symbol of divine protection, now stood over a starving population. Clay tablets from the city revealed desperate pleas sent to provincial governors, begging for grain, soldiers, and assistance that could not come. When the Elamite forces finally breached the city's defences, fell swiftly. Its king, Sin, was captured and taken in chains to the Elamite capital. The temples were plundered, their treasures carried eastward. The administrative offices, once filled with scribes who managed the affairs of a flourishing kingdom, were destroyed or abandoned. Fires swept through parts of the city, fields were left untended, irrigation canals collapsed. With the fall of the last great Sumerian dynasty ended. For the Sumerians, this was not simply the loss of a kingdom. It was the collapse of a world they had nurtured for more than 1,000 years. The world that created writing, cities, kingship, and law. In the famous literary poem, The Lament for scribes described the fall as a cosmic disaster. The storm that annihilates the land came, the storm that destroys cities rose. The people's blood filled the rivers like copper. Yet even in tragedy, Sumer did not vanish. Its cities were damaged but not abandoned. Its people survived. They rebuilt their homes, replanted their fields, and restored many of their temples, but they did so now under new rulers, Amorite kings who adopted Sumerian culture, writing, and religion as their own. Sumer was no longer the dominant power it once had been. Its political independence was gone, but its legacy endured, carried forward by the peoples who inherited its land, its language, and its ideas. And one of these Amorite-ruled cities would soon rise to prominence, reshaping Mesopotamia and preserving Sumerian wisdom for centuries to come. That city was Babylon. The fall of did not erase Sumer, it transformed it. The cities still stood along the plains between the Tigris and Euphrates. Their canals, though damaged, still flowed, their temples, though plundered, still anchored communities. And their people, scribes, farmers, craftsmen, priests, continued the routines that had shaped their world for more than 1,000 years. But the political landscape had shifted. New powers now rose from the fragments of the old, and among these rising powers, one city would come to preserve and expand the legacy of Sumer, Babylon. In the centuries following Ur's collapse, Sumerian cities did not vanish. They were absorbed into a broader cultural mosaic. Amorite chieftains, once outsiders, now ruled over many southern cities and adopted Sumerian traditions to legitimize their authority. They used cuneiform for administration, offered prayers to Sumerian gods, and restored temples that had fallen into ruin. The line between Sumerian and Amorite culture blurred, merging into a single, rich Mesopotamian identity. Babylon, once a minor settlement, began to rise in prominence during this era. Strategically located near major trade routes, it became a crossroads of merchants, caravans, and ideas. Under Amorite rule, it grew into a thriving city-state. Its early kings strengthened its defences, rebuilt its temples, and expanded its administrative power. But it was under Hammurabi, who reigned around 1792 to 1750 BC, that Babylon ascended to heights that would forever shape the ancient world. Hammurabi inherited a regional kingdom, but he dreamed of something far larger. Through diplomacy, alliances, and war, he gradually brought much of southern Mesopotamia under his control. The cities of Sumer, Uruk, Lagash, Nippur all came under Babylonian rule. For the first time since the fall of Akkad, large portions of Mesopotamia were unified under a single king. But Hammurabi did not simply conquer Sumer. He learned from it, preserved it, and built on its foundations. His most enduring achievement, the Code of Hammurabi, reveals the depth of Sumerian influence. Though famous today, the code did not appear out of nowhere. It grew from centuries of Sumerian legal tradition, from Ur-Nammu's law code to administrative tablets that recorded disputes, fines, and legal judgments. Hammurabi's code gathered these ideas into a powerful symbol of justice and royal authority, carved onto a towering stone stele for all to see. It proclaimed that the king protected the weak from the strong, that contracts must be honoured, and that society was governed by written law, a concept born in Sumer's earliest days. Sumerian culture also shaped Babylonian religion. The pantheon of gods remained largely the same, though Babylon elevated its own deity, Marduk, to supreme status. Myths that had once been told in Sumerian temples were rewritten in Akkadian, the language now spoken across Mesopotamia. The famous Epic of Gilgamesh, originally composed in Sumerian motifs and legends, survived because Babylonian scribes preserved it. In their tablets, the ancient stories of Uruk's legendary king were refined into one of the world's greatest literary masterpieces. Temples, too, remained central to life. Each city-state in southern Mesopotamia continued to maintain its ziggurat and its patron deity. Priests performed rituals that had been practiced for centuries, appealing to the gods for protection, rain, and prosperity. Festivals honouring Inanna, Nana, Enlil, and Enki continued as they had during Sumer's golden age. In the fields, farmers still used the ploughs, irrigation techniques, and agricultural practices developed thousands of years earlier. Scribes continued to learn cuneiform, filling clay tablets with wedge-shaped impressions that documented every aspect of life. From trade accounts to school exercises, the form and use of writing remained largely unchanged, a testament to the brilliance of Sumer's earliest scribes. Yet while Sumerian culture lived on, the Sumerian language itself began to fade from everyday use. Akkadian, a Semitic language, gradually replaced it as the spoken tongue of Mesopotamia. By Hammurabi's time, Sumerian was no longer the language of the marketplace or the street, but it did not vanish. Instead, it became a scholarly and sacred language, preserved by priests and scribes much like Latin, centuries later. Young scribes in Babylonian schools practiced Sumerian signs, even if they did not speak the language fluently. They copied ancient Sumerian hymns, proverbs, and myths. They studied old royal inscriptions, temple records, and epic poems. In this way, Sumer's intellectual world continued in the hearts and minds of generations long after its political power had faded. Babylon itself was transforming. Under Hammurabi and his successors, the city expanded with new temples, administrative buildings, and canals. Its streets bustled with traders from across the Near East. Its scholars advanced mathematics and astronomy. Its legal and literary traditions spread across the ancient world. Yet at the core of all this innovation remained the foundations laid by Sumer, the methods of writing, the structure of cities, the systems of law, and the stories that connected humanity to the divine. As the Babylonian Empire solidified, the world built by the Sumerians found new life. The cities of the plain, ancient sacred Nippur, storied Eridu, continued to thrive under Babylonian rule. The southern marshes filled with fishermen and reed harvesters. Farmers guided the waters of the Euphrates into their fields. The gods of Sumer still received offerings. Though the Sumerian people no longer ruled, their civilization endured in the rhythms of everyday life and the monumental achievements of their cultural descendants. What had begun 6,500 years earlier in mudbrick villages and reed-lined canals now lived on in the great imperial center of Babylon. But change was never far away in Mesopotamia. New powers were rising beyond the horizon, and the cycle of empires would continue. Yet through each transformation, the heart of Sumer remained, an ancient world echoing across the ages. As the traditions of Sumer lived on through Babylon, one of the most remarkable legacies that endured was not found in monuments or kingship, but in the mindset of the civilization, a way of observing, measuring, and understanding the world that shaped the intellectual foundations of the ancient Near East. Long before Babylonian astronomers charted the skies or Assyrian scholars compiled vast libraries, it was the Sumerians who planted the seeds of science, mathematics, and written knowledge. At the heart of Sumerian innovation was their ability to transform practical necessity into structured knowledge. Life in Mesopotamia demanded careful management of water, crops, canals, and labor. To maintain order in a world defined by seasonal floods, unpredictable rainfall, and complex irrigation systems, the Sumerians relied on something unprecedented: record-keeping. Even in the earliest cities like Uruk, scribes filled clay tablets with symbols representing grain, livestock, workers, and offerings. Over time, these symbols evolved into the detailed cuneiform system. But writing was more than a tool. It became a lens through which the Sumerians understood their world. It allowed them not only to record the past, but to predict the future, creating the earliest forms of scientific thinking. One of their most transformative contributions was mathematics. To manage canals, fields, and trade, the Sumerians developed a base 60 system, a sexagesimal structure, unlike the base 10 system we use today. This is why we still divide an hour into 60 minutes and a circle into 360 degrees. These measurements are echoes of Sumerian thought, still alive in modern life. On clay tablets, Sumerian mathematicians solved problems involving geometry, land measurement, and volume. They calculated the areas of fields, the yield of crops, and the distribution of laborers. Their numbers were not abstract puzzles. They were tools to control the physical world. In their hands, mathematics became a way to impose order on nature. The Sumerians were also pioneers of early astronomy. Living under vast open skies, they observed the moon as it waxed and waned, the path of the sun, and the subtle motion of stars across the horizon. These observations were not idle curiosities. They allowed priests to create one of the earliest lunar calendars, essential for timing religious festivals, predicting floods, and regulating agricultural cycles. Their interest in the heavens was deeply connected to religion. They believed the divine communicated through celestial patterns, and their careful sky-watching formed the foundation of later Babylonian and Assyrian astronomy. Every eclipse, every unusual star, every shifting constellation was interpreted as part of the cosmic dialogue between gods and humans. But the Sumerians did not stop with mathematics and astronomy. They developed intricate systems of medicine, combining practical remedies with spiritual understanding. Clay tablets describe treatments for wounds, digestive issues, respiratory ailments, and fevers. Some remedies were surprisingly advanced: herbs, poultices, and even early forms of antiseptic cleansing. Others were intertwined with prayer, incantation, and ritual, reflecting a world where science and belief coexisted rather than conflicted. Their study of the human body, though limited by the era, showed remarkable observation. They recognized symptoms, classified illnesses, and sought patterns in recovery. They understood that some ailments were physical and others psychological. Their approach laid the groundwork for the medical traditions of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond Sumerian knowledge extended into engineering and architecture as well. The construction of canals, dams, and ziggurats required careful planning and skilled labour. Engineers had to calculate weight distribution, material requirements, and structural stability. The massive temples and palaces rising above their cities were not built by guesswork. They were products of accumulated expertise, passed down through generations. Even their art reveals a mastery of technique and symbolism. Cylinder seals carved with exquisite detail functioned like personal signatures. Jewelry makers crafted intricate gold, silver, and lapis artifacts. Sculptors shaped statues that captured both the physical form and spiritual presence of their subjects. Their artistic achievements demonstrate not only creative talent, but an understanding of materials and tools. Underlying all these accomplishments was a powerful intellectual institution, the Adubba, or tablet school. Here, young scribes trained for years under strict supervision. They practiced cuneiform signs until their hands ached, memorized lists of words, copied proverbs, studied mathematics, and learned the fundamentals of administration. These schools created a literate class capable of preserving and expanding Sumerian knowledge. In the quiet rooms of these tablet schools, illuminated by oil lamps, the future of Mesopotamian civilization was shaped. Generations of scribes copied and recopied ancient texts, ensuring their survival long after the Sumerian language faded from everyday speech. But for all the structured knowledge they cultivated, the Sumerians also nurtured a rich spiritual imagination. Their mythology explored creation, fate, the afterlife, and the relationship between gods and humans. Their stories of Inanna descending into the underworld, of Enki shaping humanity from clay, of Gilgamesh searching for immortality, reveal a profound curiosity about the human condition. These myths were not static. They evolved through centuries, carried forward by the Babylonians, reinterpreted by the Assyrians, and eventually echoed in the stories of later civilizations. They represent some of the earliest attempts to understand existence itself. Sumer's legacy, then, was far more than its cities, kings, or temples. It was a way of thinking, analytical, observant, imaginative, and deeply reflective. Through clay tablets and careful observation, the Sumerians transformed human understanding of time, law, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and literature. Their world may have faded from political power, but their mind, their intellectual blueprint, became the foundation upon which Mesopotamian civilization would flourish for millennia. As we move deeper into the world of Sumer, we enter the realm that shaped their identity more profoundly than any empire or invention: their mythology. For the Sumerians, the universe was not an empty stage, but a living system filled with divine forces. Every river, storm, harvest, and star was tied to unseen powers, and the stories they told about those powers formed one of humanity's earliest mythological frameworks. These stories were not merely entertainment, they were explanations of existence, reflections of human fears and hopes, and blueprints for how the world worked. At the center of their cosmos stood the great gods of the Sumerian pantheon, powerful, unpredictable beings who governed everything from water to war. Their chief deity was An, the sky god, a distant, overarching presence who granted kingship and cosmic authority. Beneath him stood Enlil, the lord of wind and storms, a god both creative and destructive. Enlil could bless the land with fertile winds or unleash catastrophic tempests. He presided over Nippur, the religious heart of Sumer, and kings sought his approval through offerings, prayers, and temple construction. Another central figure was Enki, the god of water, wisdom, and creation. Unlike the stern Enlil, Enki was a benevolent and clever deity. Myths described him shaping humanity from clay, designing the structure of society, and teaching people the arts of irrigation, writing, and craftsmanship. He appeared in stories as a generous protector, guiding humans with subtle wisdom rather than forced temples dedicated to Enki and Eridu, one of the oldest cities in Mesopotamia, served as centers of ritual, learning, and administration. But perhaps no deity captured the spirit of Sumer more than Inanna, goddess of love, war, fertility, and power. Inanna was a paradox, embodying both desire and destruction, compassion and fury. Her myths reveal a complex character unmatched in the ancient world. One of the most famous stories tells of her descent into the underworld. In this tale, Inanna travels to the realm of the dead, passing through 7 gates, shedding worldly symbols of power at each step. When she confronts her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, she is struck down and left to hang lifeless. Only through divine intervention is she resurrected and returned to the world above. This myth, a cycle of descent, death, and rebirth, became a powerful symbol of agricultural renewal, seasonal change, and the fragility of life. Their myths were not limited to divine dramas. They also explored the relationship between gods and humanity. One such tale describes the gods overwhelmed by the burdens of maintaining the cosmos, digging canals, organizing fields, shaping land. Exhausted and frustrated, they created human beings to take over the labor. In this myth, humans were born not as equals to the gods, but as helpers, responsible for tending the world through work, ritual, and devotion. This story reflected the Sumerian view of life, duty, order, and the careful maintenance of the fragile environment around them. Another myth, one that would echo across cultures, is the flood story, the tale of a catastrophic deluge sent by the gods to cleanse the world. In the Sumerian version, a man named Sudra receives a divine warning and builds a great boat to save himself and the seeds of life. After the waters subside, he offers sacrifices of gratitude. This early narrative, preserved in Sumerian and later Babylonian texts, became one of the world's most enduring flood legends, eventually finding new life in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Atrahasis myth, and even the biblical story of Noah. Among the most profound creations of Sumerian literature is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which began as a set of Sumerian stories before being expanded into a Babylonian masterpiece. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, is portrayed as a powerful but restless ruler seeking fame and meaning. His journey, battling monsters, defying gods, and searching for immortality, explores humanity's deepest questions. The death of his companion Enkidu forces him to confront the inevitability of mortality. In the end, Gilgamesh learns that eternal life does not lie in escaping death, but in the lasting achievements one leaves behind. It is one of the earliest and most profound reflections on what it means to be human. These myths were not merely stories told around fires, they were woven into the daily lives of Sumerians. Festivals reenacted divine battles and seasonal cycles. Priests recited hymns that preserved ancient memories. Temples performed rituals to honor the gods and seek their protection. The calendar itself, measured by moons, floods, and agricultural cycles, was shaped by mythological tradition. Even the structure of Sumerian society reflected divine order. Kings ruled as representatives of the gods, entrusted to maintain justice, oversee irrigation, and ensure prosperity cities were seen as earthly domains of their patron deities. Each had its own sacred identity. Under the moon god, Nana, Nippur under Enlil, Eridu under Enki. To attack a city was not merely an act of war, but a challenge to its god. In their myths, the Sumerians captured the complexity of life. The struggle to survive in a demanding land, the cyclical nature of seasons, the awe inspired by the heavens, and the mystery of death. Their stories became templates for later civilizations, shaping mythologies across the Near East and leaving deep imprints on human imagination. The myths of Sumer are the earliest windows into how humanity understood itself. Fragile, curious, ambitious, and forever seeking meaning in a world filled with forces beyond control. These narratives, carved onto clay tablets and preserved for thousands of years, remain some of the oldest and most profound expressions of the human spirit. With the rise of Babylon, the collapse of and the changing political landscape of Mesopotamia, the world that the Sumerians built, the world that first emerged 6,500 years ago, seemed to fade into the background. Yet the truth is far more profound. Sumer never vanished. Its ideas, inventions, stories, and structures became the very foundation upon which later civilizations stood. Long after its cities crumbled and its language ceased to be spoken, Sumer lived on in every corner of the ancient Near East, like an echo that never stopped reverberating across time. Even in the centuries after their decline, Sumerian cities remained populated and active. Uruk, Lagash, Nippur. These ancient centres did not fall silent. They shifted under new rulers, adapted to new political realities, and continued to serve as economic and religious hubs. Their temples were rebuilt, their ziggurats repaired, and their scribes continued to copy old texts. The administrative systems, first created by Sumerian scribes, were adopted by their conquerors and successors. Kings across Mesopotamia, Amorite, Babylonian, Assyrian, all relied on cuneiform tablets, recording their edicts using the writing system developed by Sumer's earliest thinkers. The influence of Sumer extended even deeper. The Babylonian calendar, the structure of Mesopotamian timekeeping, the legal codes, the patterns of trade, and the layout of cities all descended from Sumerian innovations. When Babylonian astronomers mapped the stars, they built upon observations first made by Sumerian sky watchers. When later kings carved law codes into stone, they echoed the structure established by Ur-Nammu. When scholars read epic literature, they encountered characters whose stories began in Sumerian poems. Gilgamesh, Inanna, Enkidu, Ziusudra. And yet, for all this influence, the Sumerian language slowly retreated into the world of temples and schools. By the early 2nd millennium BC, Sumerian was no longer commonly spoken on the street. Akkadian, a Semitic language, had taken its place. But in an extraordinary act of cultural preservation, the scribes of Mesopotamia kept Sumerian alive for more than 1,000 years after it stopped being spoken. They treated it as a sacred scholarly language used in rituals, hymns, and literary compositions. For centuries, young scribes trained by copying ancient Sumerian texts, proverbs, myths, incantations, and royal inscriptions. In their schools, the ancient words continued to breathe, passed from hand to hand, tablet to tablet. Long after Sumer's political independence disappeared, its spiritual and intellectual world remained at the heart of Mesopotamian identities, even as empires rose and fell, from the Babylonians to the Assyrians, from the Persians to the Greeks. The memory of the old Sumerian gods lingered. Temples dedicated to Enlil, Enki, and Nana continued to function. Their hymns were sung in Akkadian adaptations. Their festivals were woven into the rhythms of later Mesopotamian life. But no civilization, no matter how enduring, stands untouched by time. By the 1st millennium BC, many of Sumer's ancient cities were shrinking. trade routes shifted. New powers emerged beyond Mesopotamia. Changing river courses left some regions barren. Though the great ziggurats remained, they weathered, crumbled, and were slowly swallowed by sand and time. The stories carved on clay tablets were buried beneath layers of dust. For centuries, Sumer passed into silence, not gone but waiting. It was not until the mid-19th century, when European and Middle Eastern archaeologists began excavations in Iraq, that the world rediscovered the Sumerians. As scholars dug through the mounds of Tel el-Muqayya, ancient Ur, Waka, ancient Uruk, and Tello, ancient Lagash, they uncovered temples, walls, sculptures, and, most astonishingly, thousands of clay tablets covered in wedge-shaped writing. At first, no one could read them. The language was unknown, the script mysterious. For decades, scholars worked tirelessly to decipher cuneiform. When they finally unlocked its secrets, the lost world of Sumer was reborn. Myths, legal codes, poetry, economic records all emerged in startling detail. The names of kings long forgotten resurfaced. Ur-Nammu, Shulgi, Eannatum, Lugal-Zagessi. Entire cities once thought mythical proved to be real. The earliest chapters of human history were rewritten, illuminating a civilization that had stood at the dawn of the urban world. The rediscovery of Sumer changed our understanding of humanity's past. It revealed that writing did not begin in Egypt or China, but in the temples or sepulchres of southern Mesopotamia. It showed that the wheel, the plough, administrative bureaucracy, and monumental architecture had all emerged from this ancient land. It proved that organized religion, law codes, and literature had roots far deeper than previously imagined. Sumer was not a forgotten side chapter in human history. It was the opening act of civilization itself. Today, the ruins of Sumer lie quiet under the Iraqi sun. The Ziggurat of Ur rises above the desert, its restored terraces glowing in the heat. The remains of ancient canals cut across the plains like scars. Fragments of broken tablets still lie scattered across archaeological sites, silent until they are studied and translated. Yet the spirit of Sumer endures. In every book that relies on writing, in every city shaped by administration, in every legal system grounded in written law. The world that existed 6,500 years ago is distant, but its legacy surrounds us. From the structure of time to the foundations of government, from mathematical systems to mythological themes, we live today in a world shaped by the Sumerians, a civilization that built the first cities, charted the first stars, wrote the first stories, and opened the long pathway of human history. And so our journey through ancient Sumer comes to an end. A world born from mud, ingenuity, and divine imagination has guided us across millennia, reminding us that even the oldest civilizations can speak with a voice that still feels alive. Thank you for traveling into the ancient past.